Well, here I make an upload again. Anyways, so not too long ago, Left 4 Dead 2 was on a discount, and a friend bought it for me, and he also bought it for himself, and so we kind of played it, and I decided to, you know what? Let me make one of those weird lore videos and explain the game and recommending it. So here's my shot at it. I hope you guys like it. If you do, please like, and a sub would be great. Anyways, let's start with the first mission. So we're going to play the campaign into chronological order. That means starting with Left 4 Dead 1 and ending it with Left 4 Dead 2. Now it all starts with the 4 survivors: Bill, Zoe, Lewis, and Francis. This group of survivors, we're just gonna name them the first group of survivors because in Left 4 Dead 2 it's another group. We never know how they have met, like they just are somehow together. But what we do know is that at the time of the first mission, No Mercy, it has been over 2 weeks since the first infection. The virus in this game is called the green flu, and this virus basically does turn people aggressive and agitated and make them hungry for human flesh. Now I'm gonna go over the background of the survivors. So we're gonna start with Bill. Bill, he is a Vietnam veteran who was a part of the US Army's 1st Special Forces group. Zoe is a student. Pretty boring background. Basically, she was just a failing student, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Lewis is a junior systems analyst in his IT company, so he used to work in an office when the zombie apocalypse started. We know this because in the comics it is shown that he was working when that happened. I will get into the comics later because it has something to do with the lore, but for now we're just gonna stick to that. Francis is an outlaw biker who is just, you know, the stereotypical biker. Nothing much interesting other than that he's like 6'5". So anyways, now that I went into the character's background, I'm going to talk about the first mission, which is called No Mercy. The mission starts off on top of a roof in an urban area where a helicopter is seen flying by, ordering any remaining survivors to get to the Mercy Hospital to get evacuated from the city. The survivors learn about it and decide that the safest way is to go through the subway to reach the Mercy Hospital. But on their way, they encounter zombies and some mutations of them. I'm going to go briefly over the mutations. First, we have the Hunter, basically an emo looking guy who, you know, beats you. That's it. But the only way to get him off you is if your teammate helps you. You can't really get him off you. Second, we have the Jockey, some random monkey who escaped their cage and it decided it was a good day to, you know, start humping people. Third, we have the Charger, some big guy who charges at you and proceeds to beat you on the ground like he's trying to start a fire with flint and steel. Fourth, we have the Boomer, some fat guy who vomits on you, and then zombies get attracted to you, you know, to your smell, and run towards you to tell you to take a shower and also beat you. Witch, some sad lady crying, but if you hang her, she will one-shot you and proceed to beat you as if you were a child and you told your mom you got a bad grade. And the final, the Tank. That's a tank. Some fat dude that can wipe your team in seconds if you don't kill him fast enough. So then we have the Smoker, which is literally like licking you, and he's sometimes annoying, sometimes he's okay to deal with, but otherwise he just licks you. So yeah, that summarizes basically the mutants. Anyways, the survivors are headed to the hospital and have to fight through hordes of zombies. The survivors make it to the roof somehow, I don't know, and have to radio in the helicopter to get evacuated. And once they eventually call in the helicopters, zombie hordes rush them and they have to defend themselves from the zombies until the helicopter eventually arrives. The helicopter does eventually arrive and they escape. So the helicopter picks them up and they eventually do escape, but at some point the pilot ends up turning and one of the survivors, being Zoe, is forced to kill him, and so they do crash. Somehow our characters survive that. Blood Harbor. And the survivors have to get away from the city because it's basically a death trap, and they decide to look around and search for any type of vehicle they might use. And so the survivors eventually find the armored vehicle, which then we have to activate the generators to lower the car and drive our way out of here. Our survivors eventually manage to escape. After the survivors drove for a while, they eventually arrived at a roadblock. The road was blocked by abandoned cars and a destroyed bridge. So, the survivors had to go on foot. The survivors spot signs of an evacuation zone in the town of Riverside, which was nearby, and decided to head there. So, they go and make their way through some sewers, and they eventually arrive in front of a church where a safe house is. So the survivors notice that there is a man already inside of the safe house, but he seems not quite good in the head. And the survivors say he should let them in because they are immune, which is the first time where the survivors actually mention they're immune. And the insane man tells them that basically an hour earlier a survivor came saying the same thing, but once he was let in, he turned and bit the insane man. So then the insane man starts talking about how he is immune and that, you know, basically he won't get infected anytime soon, and then starts to ring the church's bell. So our survivors have to start defending themselves from a zombie horde, and eventually, as always, our survivors survive. And then they enter the safe house, and the insane man eventually turns and their survivors have to kill him. The survivors continue searching for a way to escape, and they find a wooden shack in a forest near a river. And they spot a radio, and so the survivors had the idea to call in for rescue, so they do. The survivors hold their ground until a boat arrives and picks them up. So the boat that picked them up decides to drop them in the city of Newburgh, and so the survivors arrive at this flower garden to rest until they spot a plane heading towards a direction, and the survivors have the idea that maybe the plane is going to land to the nearest airport and is going to refuel. And so they follow it. I'm gonna go a bit off topic here, but basically as you seem to notice, there has been this one organization sticking out like a sore thumb, and it's basically CEDA. CEDA stands for Civil Emergency and Defense Agency, and it's basically a fictional organization which is kind of like the FEMA and the CDC we have in real life. They basically take care of you know, diseases on how they spread, and they try to control it basically. CEDA is kind of useless after the military saw how bad they were at containing the situation, and that the safe zones were being mostly overrun, and so now the military steps in to do their job. So the only thing that remains of them is just old safe zones and stations which have been overrun. Anyways, so the survivors arrive at the airport and basically notice that the plane did land and just needs refueling, and they also notice a dead person near the fuel pump and see that he had a radio on him. They use the radio, tell the pilot that they're there, and the pilot orders them to just refuel the C-130 and he will take them. So they defend the fuel pump, and the plane does eventually pick them up and they're safe again. So they thought. Next thing you know, their pilot turns again, and so they crash again. So they crash and survive again, and they looked around for a bit and ran around for quite a while. They noticed signs of a CEDA evacuation nearby, and so they head for it, and they had to go through a cornfield, and they eventually arrive at a farmhouse where a radio transmitter is located. And so they use it to call in the military, and so they have to defend the place until the military reaches them. And so they fight until a APC, armored personnel carrier vehicle, arrives and picks them up. Alright, so the lore continues in the Sacrifice comic. Basically in the comic, the survivors are brought to a military base to be researched. So they got locked up in a cell, and at some point researchers come by to research them, and you know, stuff happens, and eventually the researchers tell them the truth, that they never were immune, they were just asymptomatic carriers, which basically means they have the green flu, they just don't show symptoms, and so they're basically spreading the virus without them knowing. That's why both of the pilots turned into zombies. It's because of them, basically. Now, eventually, they do manage to get freed from the military base because of a mutiny and the base being overrun by zombies. But yeah. So the survivors have an idea that they want to execute, which is basically to take a boat and sail it to the Florida Keys Islands, which they think they can live in safely and not be worried about infecting other people, and also not dealing with the zombies. So they reach a town called Brayford, where they're going to search for sailboats in order to reach those islands. After a while of searching, they do manage to find a boat. One issue arises: they have to open the bridge in order for the sailboat to get through. They have to power up 4 generators in order for the bridge to open. The survivors fought for a while, and then they managed to power up those generators, but a problem arises, and it seems that one of the generators must be restarted. So Bill decides to sacrifice himself so that the others escape. The campaign starts off 1 week after the mission No Mercy took place, with our new group of survivors on top of a roof missing a helicopter evacuation. So they proceed to exit from the building and make their way towards the nearest mall because there was a CETA evacuation zone there. So on their way to the mall, they notice a gun shop and they go through there and get some weapons. The shop owner talks to them through a loudspeaker and tells them that if they get him some cola, he will blow up the fuel truck blocking their way. So the survivors accept it and do as requested. Once the survivors deliver the cola, the gun shop owner, as promised, blows it up and our survivors advance. So once they arrive, they notice that the zone has been overrun. So with no other option, they decide to go a local car racer meeting where the car racer's car should be there. So they eventually make it to the car meet and decide to take his car, but first of all they have to refuel the car in order to use it. Eventually they manage to refuel it and they get out of there. And these survivors group's goal is to basically reach New Orleans because they think that it's the last standing cities from the zombies. Now I'm gonna go briefly over our second group of survivors. Well, up first we have Nick, who is a prison inmate and a gambler. So literally me, Ryan Gosling. And then we have Ellis, who is a southerner mechanic, basically. Rochelle is a low-level associate producer for a big news station, and Coach is a coach. So the survivors strive again until they eventually reach the town of Brayford, where the first survivor group is. The survivors end up meeting them and have to lower the bridge in order for them to cross. To do that, they have to refuel all 4 generators and then they can cross. So they eventually do refuel them, and you can also see Bill's body in the room next to the generator. So that confirms that Bill was the one in the sacrifice to die. The survivors thank the other survivors, but the survivors eventually arrive at a roadblock again at a highway, and they basically have to go on foot from now on. And in the distance they spot an amusement park where they see spotlights flashing, so they make their way to the amusement park, fighting tons of zombies. And on their way to the spotlight, the survivors overhear a helicopter fly by, and once they arrive at the spotlights, they notice that it's just concert spotlights and they were functioning because the amusement park still had some power remaining. So they decide to start the concert to attract the helicopter's attention, and it does eventually work and gets the survivors. So they crash once more because the pilot turns because of the survivors, guys. You know, just what happens right now. Also, 1 like equal 1 prayer for all the helicopter pilots that had to extract the survivors. Anyways, we're getting out of script here. But basically they crash, and they crash into a village, and so they search around because it was like in a swampy village. And once they find a big mansion, which they had to go through a plane wreckage and stuff like that, they find a radio transmitter, which they use to contact the sailor whose name is Virgil. Virgil? How do you pronounce that? Whatever. And so they hold their ground until he eventually arrives and picks them up. So after a while of sailing, the survivors get dropped off by Virgil, and they have to get fuel for him, and the survivors have to search for fuel. So they do eventually find some after running around for a while. Once they do find the fuel and have to go back, a harsh storm comes, and their visibility is basically 0. They can barely see, and it's really hard for them to get back, but they still manage to do it. And they make it back to the burger town. Now Virgil ordered them to use a flare, but they did not use the flare. They instead used the Burger Town's sign to shine light and show Virgil that they're there, and so they defend themselves until Virgil and picks them up. The survivors finally reach their destination being New Orleans, and they say goodbye to Virgil and fight their way to the evacuation zone until they basically notice that the evacuation zone is overrun. So they head further, and on a bridge they notice a dead soldier with a radio that it's still on. So they pick up the radio and say that they are still 4 survivors on the bridge. The other person on the other side presents himself as Papagator, and he asks the survivors if they're immune to the virus. The survivors in the beginning dodged the question, but Papagator kept insisting if they are immune or not. And so they say the truth to Papagator, and Papagator asks the pilot if he is ready for carriers, and the pilot says yes. So the survivors have to run across the bridge before it gets bombed and destroyed. They have to make their way through zombies and holes in the bridge. Once they eventually make it to the end, they get transported to a military base, and not much is known afterwards. So this is the end of the video, and I'm gonna conclude on the game basically. Now I'm not gonna talk about multiplayer, I'm gonna do that another day, or maybe, I don't know, if this video is good and goes good. But the game in general, it's a pretty fun co-op game, and you should definitely get it if you like zombie survival games and you've never played it before. I got it because of a friend of mine who gave it to me basically, and we tried it out, but he didn't want to be on video until like the last parts to help me out, but thanks to him for the 3 last missions, because they were a pain to record. I thank him every day. But yeah, the game doesn't look bad for its time. The graphics are still really nice, and the map design is even better. Save zones, you know, that system of the save zone is really interesting because you don't see it on other games except for Dying Light. The campaigns do feel sometimes repetitive, but otherwise they're pretty fun to play. I would rate this game probably like 10 out of 10. Oh, and that's about it, I think. If we reach 3 likes, I'm gonna make another essay, so please sub, because it took me a week to make this, and yeah, see ya.